Hi everyone, welcome to the next installment of Charts and Perspective, where we use charts to dive into the world of economics and financial markets. I'm Jennifer Nash, an economic and market research analyst for TMX Verify. When we think of the U.S. government's finances, we often focus on the massive debt. But what about the assets? What does Uncle Sam actually own, and which asset is the largest? The federal government's financial assets include U.S. official reserve assets, checkable deposits in currency, other loans and advances, total mortgages, consumer credit student loans, corporate equities, trade receivables, total taxes receivable, and other. Now, according to the latest quarterly data through Q1 of this year, the largest asset among this list is student loans. A few years ago, for a brief period in 2020, the answer was checkable deposits in currency. This account soared as a result of massive stimulus and reduced consumption from the COVID pandemic. But with that said, for the majority of the past 12 years, student loans have been the government's largest asset. The rapid growth in student debt has been an ongoing topic in financial press. Here, we can see the dramatic growth of federal student loans since the Great Recession, using a log scale to highlight the percentage change. The difference between the 2007 and 2025 figures is striking, showing the rapid expansion of this asset. The loan balance has risen an astonishing 1,331% over that time frame. Now, this next chart presents the same data, but on a linear scale, emphasizing the sheer magnitude of the increase in student loan balances. The steep upward trend underscores the increasing financial burden on students and the government's role as a major lender. Now, I do want to point out that these charts only include federal loans to students. Private loans increase the debt burden. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York regularly tracks household debt and credit, and in their most recent update, they calculated student loan debt to be around $1.6 trillion. But back to our initial questions. What does Uncle Sam actually own, and which asset is largest? Student loans may be a burden and a liability on the consumer side, but they constitute an asset for Uncle Sam. As of Q1 2025, student loans accounted for the largest percentage of total federal assets at 34.3%. This is 1.5 times the size of the U.S. official reserve assets, nearly 4 times the size of checkable deposits in currency, more than 3 times the size of taxes receivable, and over 8 times the size of total mortgages. To better visualize the relative weight of student loans in the government's asset portfolio, this chart shows the percentage of total federal assets that are student loans. It shows the peak from 2017, where student loans made up 46.7% of total federal government assets, and the current value of 34.3%. Now, the composition of the U.S. government's largest asset has shifted over time. Student loans, though currently dominant, have been preceded by other categories. Other loans and advances held the largest share from the late 1970s to the early 90s, and again in the late 90s. U.S. official reserve assets were the largest in the mid-90s and for the majority of the 2000s up until 2012. A brief exception occurred during the Great Financial Crisis, when checkable deposits in currency became the largest asset, something we saw more recently as well in 2020. Here's a look at each of the assets over time from the pie chart, beginning in 2007. Each component's y-axis has been scaled to better reflect the individual changes within each asset. U.S. official reserve assets just reached a new all-time high, jumping over the $1 trillion mark for the first time in history. Again, we can see the spike in checkable deposits in currencies in 2020, and also earlier on our timeline during the Great Recession. Currently, this category has fallen for 2 straight quarters, and is sitting at its lowest level in 2 years. Other loans and advances is another category that increased dramatically following the pandemic, reaching a new high in 2023. It's currently about 4% below that record high, but it's been on the rise over the past year. Total mortgages are currently at their record high and continue to climb. Trade receivables are about 1% off their all-time high from Q3 of last year. And total taxes receivable, it spiked dramatically in 2017 and has been relatively stable since then, with seasonal spikes in the first quarter of each year, with this year as no exception. Total taxes receivable peaked a few years ago in 2022, and the latest data has it about 12% off that record high. Of course, assets are sadly the trivial side of Uncle Sam's financial accounts balance sheet, about $4.5 trillion. The liability side totaled over $34 trillion at the end of Q1 2025. Thank you for tuning in. For more economic and market insights, you can find my content regularly on the Advisor Perspectives website under the AP Chart section.